Good afternoon, everybody. It's 4 o'clock sharp, and I'm going to start the presentation. I still see some people joining us inside this webinar. First of all, a warm welcome for all of you who have taken the time out of very busy schedules, usually knowing us in our industry, to attend this webinar. I'm pretty proud that we're able to provide you with some great content today. I call it Champions League in Marketing and Insights. But maybe briefly give you a little bit of an introduction of what you can expect today. Maybe some of you, like me, with my two very young twin boys, enjoy watching documentaries. And one of the documentaries that I'm watching, and I'm watching actually time and time again, is one of David Attenborough, Live on Earth. And he starts the documentary with saying that roughly some 50 years ago, we first set foot on the moon. And it was the first moment in our lifetime that we had the opportunity to watch Earth from a distance. And from that distance, now some time later, we are returning to the moon. And in the meantime, in these 50 years, Earth's population has doubled, more than doubled. Now the question is, how do we feed all these people on Earth in a sustainable way? And I think I'm pretty proud of this webinar because we're going to talk today about Champions League in thinking about how to, on this big trend in life, figure out how we can actually turn people's food behaviors into reality when people come to figure out how they can contribute to making a more sustainable planet as an individual. Of course, this is also an area where a lot of insights are being built, and it's very important for us to be on the par, of course, of what people want and how we can persuade them, inspire them, work with them on the journey to make food sustainable. And joining us is Johannes Hartman, who I had the chance roughly 1.5 years ago to meet, who is a Champions League Insights professional. And together with Johannes, Ipsos has actually over time built a very interesting way to discover and uncover insights from consumers, which he'll be very happy, of course, to inform you about and inspire you about. Also is joining us Mick van Ettinger, who is one of the last Mohicans, you could call him. 25 years of experience, also in the Champions League, working for Unilever as a marketeer. And he joins us from LiveKindly, where on a day-to-day basis, they're trying to turn the trend into a reality. The trend of working on sustainable food chain, sustainable food production, sustainable eating, basically. And from our side, we have Rozemarijn, who is one of our great moderators, really expert also in the methodology that we'll be discussing today. So without further ado, a warm welcome to you as our presenters for today. And all of you, I wish you a really good and interesting discussion on the jobs to be done methodology. Rose.
Okay, guys, I think that is my turn. Welcome, everybody. And Dan, thank you so very much for the nice introduction. So I think you guys already quite a number of people in the webinar. You all have heard about jobs to be done in your professional career, and I hope you zoomed in today to listen to how it can be applied in practical terms, because that's what Ipsos, together with myself, and then in the context of a business environment, we demonstrate to you what we have learned in order to implement this methodology in a very straightforward and practical manner. Also, indeed, applying the right way of techniques on the research side, but then also, and I think that is mostly important, how to apply it into a practical kind of environment and operationalize the insight that we got from the approach. And for that, Mick will help us. And for the methodology part, Rozemarijn, who is an unbelievably skillful moderator, will tell us what she's learned about her way of dealing with these projects. So going to the next slide. Starting with a small anecdote, because it brings together all the principles that I've learned about jobs to be done at a time where we were not calling it jobs to be done, but it actually highlighted or highlights on what we are talking about today. By the way, this was also in an arena where Mick actually was taking the lead at the time, and I remember that with fond memories when we were working at Unilever, and they had a product that was called Cup Soup, which was actually sold as a soup, as a dry soup. And the business recognized that for dry soup there wasn't a big market. The market was not really turning, but they recognized that it was actually used also in between meals, so as a snack. And Mick was asked actually to develop a nice machine that would portion cup of soup for snack usages in any kind of situation during life. And I remember that in one of these moments he was actually taking his newly developed robot machines to the Arena Stadium in Amsterdam, where there was a soccer game with 50,000 visitors. And he was trying to sell cup of soup there with the machines. And I think, if the number is correct or not, but I think he didn't sell that more than 10 portions that evening, which pretty much taught us that the need and the experience of a snack soup is not really coming together. What we then found out in the next stage is that need actually occurs mostly in offices. And then that actually developed the roadmap for an application of a whole business model that brought cup of soup with machines and a new distribution system into offices. And I'm sure most of you remember that, seeing these machines standing in offices. Now, so Mick was actually instrumental on that journey, and he taught me something very, very kind of explicitly, that you have to connect people's experiences to where the need is actually happening. And you have to find out what kind of jobs people actually want products to do for them, rather than we are asking consumers what they need and what they want. They can't tell that, but we can find out what kind of intentions people have in certain kind of situations, what kind of barriers they experience, and how products actually can serve them well and better than existing solutions that they have. Let's go a little bit further to the next slide. The reason for our struggle with innovation actually lies in the fact that we are very often innovating without category boundaries. So we define a category, and then we think that we have to improve within those given kind of definitions. But consumers don't think that way. The way they define categories in their life goes very much beyond the technical definition of the category. I also observed very often that companies fixate their views on technologically based innovation, and what you see that technology not necessarily is led by consumers enough, and that if you only follow that route and you develop into directions that might be actually totally irrelevant for consumers. Then what I just said, we very often focus on product improvement or product ideation, rather than what we really see when innovations get effective, that we think of an innovation of an entire business model. So that means where do we have opportunities to integrate vertically and horizontally through technology, or nowadays with digital kind of engagement solution. And finally, of course, I observed very many occasions where the change management within a company is not really up to the game, but we are not going to talk about that today. Let's go one further. Okay, so here's the sermon to jobs to be done, and how actually not only innovation, but actually how business development can be led by that kind of methodology, and what are the principles actually it is founded upon, and why these principles are so important for innovation and for directing technology development. Rozemarijn? First, I think one of the key principles we apply in every kind of approach to jobs to be done is first thinking about what is our market. What is the consideration set within the market? If you go one slide further, I can explain what I mean. Now you remember the company Nokia, I suppose, which was, I think, undisputed for a long period of time in developing mobile phones. And they decided that their market is mobile phones, and they decided to innovate on an attribute level, namely to make the product smaller, because they thought the smaller the better it fits into the pocket and the easier it is to handle. Now, up came somebody who's saying, well, our market is not about mobile telephones, but our market is about digital communication across every kind of possible interaction that people can have with media. I think there was one step in between and has already been disrupted as well. But there was I don't know even how the brand actually was called. That was actually combining as a first step internet and mobile telephone and emailing, and actually was a kind of an intermediate kind of step on that kind of route. And Apple actually took it one step further. So defining the market you want to operate on and to challenge yourself in that regard is the first critical step in order to come to meaningful directions into innovation and into business model development. Next one, Rozemarijn. The second core principle, and I touched upon that one, it is that people do not buy a drill for the sake of the drill, but they want to have a hole. And the drill is actually the best way of getting that hole. But first and foremost, what people want is the hole in the wall in order to hang a picture or whatever, or drawing. So then thinking about it from that perspective is really the core kind of assumption of anything that we are going to do. So we are not looking at the product first and foremost, but we are trying to figure out what people want to achieve. And then we're looking at what would be the best solution actually to achieve what people would like to achieve. Now that is a huge difference, and Mick will relate to that, because our journey with LiveKindly actually started in a very similar way, and actually the whole category Mick is going to talk about is still thinking very much about the product, so to speak, the drill, rather than really looking at what do people actually want to achieve with these kind of plant-based products, and how can we make them fit. How can we create products that fit better into their life in order to achieve what they want? Going further. So why does this approach with jobs to be done work better? Now, the big thing behind it is that people, like we just said, hire products and services into their lives to fulfill their practical, emotional, and cultural needs. People look for solutions in their search. They don't care about categories, and they don't, at the end of the day, don't care about products. They look for solutions. And that is, and if you look at all your kind of investment in companies so far, when you innovate, ask yourselves whether you are really taking that principle serious at this point. Next slide, please. So what we're saying, you see very often when you look about needs assessment that you or look into practical kind of attribute requirements, or you look into a motivational analysis, and sometimes you would also add cultural kind of restrictions or cultural kind of beliefs into the equation. The job to be done approach actually does everything at the same time holistically and brings it together. So we are looking at what are the practical elements that are required in order to fulfill the job for the person, what are the emotional, attitudinal, and belief components of that job, and what are the cultural restrictions and beliefs that needs to be taken into consideration. So we are actually creating or manifesting and kind of a construct that is much more holistic than most of the approaches that you would see for innovation assessment. Next one, please. And finally, what we are looking at is what kind of trade-offs people are making. Now, this gentleman at the car has made a serious trade-off, namely he's saying, I better litter my shirt before I'm stopping to have a decent meal. And you see that this solution actually bears a lot of disadvantages. Now, we very often see these kind of examples in our daily life, but we do not see at the same point the opportunity that lies behind that kind of behavior and those kind of trade-offs that people are making. The jobs to be done approach does exactly that. We are looking at consumer moments, we're looking at their intentions, and the barriers and trade-offs that they create because of the need fulfillment that they prefer at that moment. And we're trying then to develop better experiences than this kind of experience that the gentleman has at this point of time. Going to the next slide. Yeah, and then on the back of that, I think as an outcome, and that is, I think, really critical, we are not defining attributes of products. We first and foremost try to define technologically independent or agnostic kind of directions to which the brand or the products have to fulfill. So we are not saying, oh, you have to increase more salt, more pepper, but we are saying these are indeed the requirements of the products to be a good fit for the moments that we have analyzed together with consumers. And therefore, we offer actually R&D departments of much wider range in order to look for solutions, rather than we're narrowing it down or that we are trying to fix something that consumers researchers don't have a big opinion about or knowledge about. So we are just saying from a consumer perspective, would be a requirement to the solution. And then we ask the R&D person, how can you deliver against that? And that is also in terms of communication, the same thing. We would say these are the requirements for consumers to understand what we are offering them. And then we would ask media management or communication companies to give us the options or give us creative kind of options to fulfill the requirements that we have defined. That delivers actually a very different platform of communication. So we are not determining attributes, but we are offering territory for creative enhancement of what is already existing on the market. Next slide, Rozemarijn. Now, that actually was the more boring theoretical part of it, and I hope I didn't lose you so far. I'm now very happy that Mick takes it over from here and gives you some perspective on reality and how he has applied those principles in his new role as CMO for LiveKindly Collective. Mick?
Yeah, hello everybody. My name is Mick van Ettinger. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer of the LiveKindly Collective. And actually super excited to be talking to you and obviously, hopefully, creating some more fans of the plant-based movement. Next slide, please, Rozemarijn. This is still quite a friendly picture, but the reality is, and we all know this, that actually our house is on fire. And normally, when your physical house is on fire, you run outside and you wait for the fire brigade to come, and they take out the fire. The problem is that our house now, which is our home, we actually can't run away from it. So the reality is that we currently, with everything that's going on, and whether that is climate change, deforestation, the loss of biodiversity, let's be honest, human diseases that are now getting seriously more impactful, it means we really have a big problem altogether. Now, if we go to the next slide, and we do then pull it down to, okay, so what can people actually do about it? What we see again and again and again, that as soon as it often comes to food and to cooking, and that might look very small, of what does that have to do with the fact that the planet is on fire, but it's not very small, is that people are very reluctant to change their habits. It is something that people, once they have these habits in cooking, they do not like changing it. So if we want to ask people to change them, we better understand these people in a deep psychological and emotional way if we want to inspire them to change. Now, if we go to the next slide, at LiveKindly Collective, we are on a mission to make plant-based living the new norm. And because our house is on fire, we want to do that fast. And on the right, you see all kind of facts and figures that explain why we have to change our lifestyle, and more specifically why we need to change our diets, because our current diet is just not sustainable. It is not sustainable. And I always, you always see here the big numbers, but just to make it very, very specific, one hamburger. So when you eat one hamburger, it has taken 215 liters of water to make that hamburger. 215 liters, you can shower for 27 minutes. So the next time you think when you're under the showers, oh, no, let's turn the shower off. Or when you brush your teeth, oh, let's turn the tap off because I'm saving water. Just remember is that one hamburger that you're eating is 215 liters, 28 minutes of showering. So just to give you a perspective is that what the impact of our diet currently is on the environment and on the planet. So now, and knowing that we want to make plant-based diets the new norm, we said, okay, we better then start understanding people in a very deep way. Now, and if we then go to the next slide, is that we said, okay, as a LiveKindly collective, and we only started in March this year, we said, okay, we need to understand millions, if not billions of people. And so that means we have to understand a lot of people and we have to understand them deeply. We have to understand how we can help them to make that transition from an animal-based diet to a plant-based diet. And by understanding that, and that's why we got in touch with Rozemarijn and with Johannes and with Ipsos and said, listen, we need to understand what are the jobs that people are having in that journey. What are the jobs that people are having in cooking and eating, and how can we help people to make that transition to a plant-based diet? Now, once we then understand that, we then can say as a collective, okay, that we can have a portfolio of brands that we can then position against those jobs and help people to make that transition, and obviously therefore help them to make a sustainable choice. Now, and then in the last thing, that then all by understanding the jobs, understanding the segmentation, understanding how we position our brands against it, let that then be the driver of all our communication, and let that then also be the driver of our innovation. Because what we have discovered is that what you see now, what Johannes also referenced to, everybody is talking about plant-based diets. It's good for the planet, it's good for the animals, and it's good for your health. And what we have discovered that is just the start. That is just the start of a very complex journey that people will need to go through to fundamentally change their behavior. And if we don't understand those jobs, if we don't understand that journey, we will never be able to change people's diet. Yes, there's a trend now going on. Yes, the market is now growing, but this market can be between 30, 40, 50 times bigger than the market is now, if we do our job correctly, if we really understand people, and if we help them to make that transition. Now, if you then go to the next slide, and now it gets what we did. We actually discovered somewhat around 16 different jobs to be done. Now, if you have 16, then obviously you can't really work with them. So what we did is we looked at these jobs, we looked there was a certain overlay, and we actually ended up by defining 8 opportunity platforms. And these 8 opportunity platforms, we understand to the deepest level, like what kind of people are in here, what kind of context are they looking for solutions, who is that audience, what are the barriers that they are experiencing there, so how can we help them, what are the requirements they have to the product, and what are the requirements is how they can get convinced to change their behavior. So by understanding all of that, we have taken that now into then our brands and in our marketing work to obviously convince more people. Now on the next slide, just to give you, and obviously we're not going to show you here now all the insights and all the platforms we have developed, because we do believe that is somewhat confidential. But just to give you one example, a little bit more specific, and we had Fry's Family Food as a brand, 29 years already in plant-based food. So these are the pioneers of plant-based food. Started 29 years in the family kitchen of the Fry's family, Wally and Debbie Fry's. They Debbie was already a vegan, Wally wasn't. They met each other. What we've discovered also in our transition model, that actually these life-changing events are really important for people to transition. They met each other and started 29 years ago. They started with fries. Now, but what we've also, so that's the brand a little bit. And by understanding now the job to be done platforms, and we have this beautiful and big job in there, which is all around love around the table. Understanding what the context is of people that have these moments of love around the table, understanding what the role is of food, understanding what the role is of the products that people pull into their life to deliver in that context is really, really important. And one of the things, again, it's not a surprise, but in this moment, people do not want to take any risk with their food. This is a moment, often just the last moment left for a family, where they get together and they actually do not want any discussion around the food, because as soon as somebody starts complaining about the food, then of course the moment is ruined. And that's the worst thing that can happen. So the food needs to be family classics. They need to be the dishes that everybody recognize. It needs to be the ingredients that everybody recognize. And then people might be willing to have some changes as long as you don't give them any risk. Now, understanding that, and understanding that as a brand, obviously then starts helping us to define our products and our communication. What we did, understanding that context, that we went back to our brand and said, okay, now what is then the true and sharpest positioning that we can create? So we actually had redefined the position, or sharpened the positioning of the fries brand. And this is our brand plate. It's for food with all the elements in there, and whether that is around the people that we serve, or whether that's the purpose of the brand, or whether that is all the benefits that you can come up with, all the differentiation. We've all seen the models, but it's just sharpening the brand positioning against the job to be done, and then say, okay, now let's look back at our visual identity and see if that's still up to date. Let's look at our brand idea and our communication, and then look also at product and innovation strategy. So we looked at all these elements, and yes, we did make some changes. And just to give, again, it's a very small example, but it just shows how you can get your brands and your positioning. What we discovered, and it is really around families. It is really around children. So if Fries sells plant-based burgers, we have to make sure that there are actually 4 burgers in a pack. Because if you, and there are 4 burgers in a pack, because it needs to suit the family. And these burgers, you know what? It's okay if they're a little bit smaller and a little bit thinner, because children will eat them also. And it needs to be easier for children to eat. And that is how you then look at all the elements of our mix, because for us, it was a lot about now renovation and improving our proposition. We look at our brands, and then we say, okay, how can we optimize it? Now, and what you see there, it's not even in the market yet, but this is then also a redefined logo, more proud, clearer about what it stands for, and when you see this on the pack, you will fully understand it. So this is then just an example to show how we've taken all the jobs to be done, translated them in opportunity platforms, then looked at our brands and said, okay, which platforms are they focusing on, sharpening our brands against that platform, and then translating that in all the elements of the marketing mix. And it has seriously given us far more insight and a sharper way of defining our brands, and eventually, again, a sharper way in helping people to transition from an animal-based diet to a plant-based diet, and take them with us step by step, and transforming them as much as we can in a very humble and respectful way. That's the little story of the LiveKindly Collective. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mick. Very interesting to hear. So what I would like to dive into now is to share a little bit about the research perspective out of Jobs to be Done, and how it's different from regular type of qualitative research. Because really it's not the same. There are of course similarities, but it is a little bit apples and oranges compared. It really is a little bit different, and let me share with you what's exactly different about it. So jobs to be done research is all about the experience. The experience is really key. Focusing on the experiences and uncovering, revealing those experiences. On one hand, it's about the experience that people seek and what they aspire to, but it's also about the current experience. So the context surrounding the current experience that people have, the struggles that they might come across, what they encounter, and then looking at the current experience, the actual experience, and the gap that might be between the actual experience and the one they actually seek, and then seeing how you can improve that. So the focus is really on that experience part. But how do we do that? So jobs research is different, first of all, by the interview approach, by the fieldwork approach. It's not quite the same as regular research. First of all, there's a lot of attention on context. So it's really about understanding the bigger picture, really about uncovering where people are coming from, for instance, who they're living with, but also the kind of bigger questions of what's their outlook in life, what they dream about, what they hope for, what keeps them awake at night. So really understanding all those things that formed them as a person. And we want to understand that context to be able to really understand their story, to understand them as a person. And the part of the interviews, the fieldwork, is also two-folded. So when we approach these kind of interviews, there's two parts to them. And one is about revealing attitudes and beliefs, understanding their behavior and the perceptions that they have about the category. And of course, we also want to understand what's behind that, what has formed those ideas, where are those ideas coming from? So that's the one side of that. The other side is about really understanding that actual experience. So really deep diving into what actually happens. And we do that by asking people to think back to the last time that they did something or that they used a product. In this case, we ask people to think back to the last time that they made a meatless meal. Prepared that. And then we really go into all the details. So we spend a lot of time diving into it and asking people what happened. What happened beforehand? What happened during the preparation? What happened afterwards? What did you do afterwards? And then also really exploring what they were actually doing, but also what they were thinking, what was going through their mind as they were preparing these things. And also what were they feeling when they were preparing these things. And then the actual process is also covered in a lot of detail. So really going step by step, what happened next? What did you do? What was your thinking behind doing that? So really lots of detailed questions to really understand the actual experience as well. So to take this approach actually means taking time, taking a long time, because you really want to take the time to really uncover the experience that people have and to really collect their story, to really understand their story and to take the time to listen to it. So it takes the time to dive into it. And also it's a relatively larger number of interviews than what you might know from other qualitative research. Because you really want to also be able to collect the different types of occasions and experiences people have. So it's not just about the one time it happened, but also different moments and then for different people to make sure you have a large collection of these kind of experiences. So it really is a different way to set up the interviews, the fieldwork, and to go about it. More specifically, it's also a different way of interviewing. It's a different interview style. So the priority in this approach is really on empathy. Now you might say, of course, in qualitative research, there's always empathy, but this takes it one step further. You really stand next to the respondent and it's, I would say, almost like being a friend to them, really standing next to them and listening to them and making them feel confident, like they can confide in you, like they can share their stories with you. On the other hand, it's also not like a friend because it's also a little bit like being a psychologist. And I mean that in a positive sense, because it's very much about listening to them, but also observing them and maybe taking a little bit of distance and having a kind of feeling that they're not judged, so that we really are open to everything that they say. So it's, I would say, a combination of the friend and the psychologist. And as in other qualitative research, there is a very natural interview flow, but this takes that even further. It's really up to the flow of the conversation and what we talk about, how the flow of the conversation goes. And that actually means that all conversations are different. So all the interviews that we've done have been very different, and they all have a different flow, different amount of time spent on certain elements. There's also lots of positive confirmation, so lots of positive encouragement to encourage people to share more, lots of mirroring, lots of recognizing emotions and sharing them and mirroring those emotions to the respondent. So it really is a different way of going about it, and it's really human focused, really empathetic. And it is a way, a different style that is actually something that requires mastering. It's something that we've learned from experience, that it isn't always intuitive right away. It is something to gain practice in, and in that sense, practice makes perfect. So aside from having this different approach to the interviews, having this different way of interviewing, one of the key differences as well in jobs to be done research is about analysis. Sometimes you might come out of research and already have a hunch or already have a feeling of what the outcome will be or what the winner will be of a certain route. In this type of research is a little bit different. It really requires lots of puzzling still after you've done all the field work. And it's very much about diving into that data. So we have the individual consumer stories that we end up with. So those are very elaborate. And what we do is that's basically our raw data that we explore. And we start digging into that and diving into it to see the similarities that exist in the context, in the struggles, in the needs, in the aspirations, in the intentions that people have. And we start plotting those similarities and joining them. And then we join them and we frame them into jobs. And it's quite a puzzle to separate those, to make sure that they are similar jobs and that some might be better off separate, or that they do form one job. So joining those jobs together, then we take a step back and we take a bit of a holistic perspective. And we look at the different jobs that we found and we explore clusters. So we try to see what belongs together, the meta jobs we call them. And from those we uncover opportunities. So opportunities to follow up on, and we call that an opportunity roadmap. And in that sense, we could also plot them according to, for instance, the low-hanging fruits or the high-hanging fruits, or those requiring smaller innovations or larger innovations. So it's a real puzzle to bring up that analysis, and it's really from bottom up that you explore this. And just to give you an example of one of the jobs and how you construct this, this is the one that Mick was mentioning before, of love around the table. So it's really about building up the different elements, the context to understand what the situation is like, what is happening around this job. Then diving into the struggles. So what are the frustrations? What's happening? What's stopping people from getting to the intention that they have with this job? Then it is indeed about the intention and understanding that. What's the ultimate goal that people want with this job? What do they want of it? And then we link it to the category. So we look at how the category is currently playing a role in that job. Is it playing a role, or maybe it isn't? And what's the thinking behind that? And this allows us to make a translation from the job to what that means for job requirements. So what that means for the requirements when it comes to functional requirements, but also very much the emotional requirements, the personal requirements, the social requirements that people have with the jobs. And that directs how the jobs can be translated. And this is just an example as well of when you have those different jobs combined, that you can see the roadmap and the opportunities and bring the clusters together. Joining them and then seeing where is opportunities to act upon. So bringing it all together, jobs to be done research really is not the same. It has a different approach where the core really is on uncovering that experience and doing that by having this more elaborate 360 interview approach, by having the very human, empathetic interview style, and also by really starting from the bottom up and then reaching up to those jobs and then to the opportunities. So this is a very quick peek into our jobs to be done methodology and our approach.